This is your host, Ben MUMME, and the goal of my show is really simple: to learn from those who have mastered their craft at what they do. So if you're new to my show, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Today, I am joined again by Daniela Cambone, a journalist with ITM Trading and the founder of the Daniela Cambone Show. So Daniela, pleasure to have you back on.
Ben, it's always so nice being with you. And I just want to congratulate you on the success of your show. And I'm just so happy with how things are going for you. So kudos to you.
I really appreciate that. It means a lot. I wanted to start off today's conversation, Daniela. You are really well respected in the gold and silver space. But when you look at the financial world, what is your biggest fear that you see right now?
My biggest fear, it's more, I would say, concern, is that enough people are not educated and prepared to deal with what might be in store ahead of us. So folks who, don't watch shows like mine or yours, Ben, or, others outside of mainstream media, I feel might be caught by surprise when the wheels come off. So I think it's more of a concern, and it could be anything, central bank digital currencies, the greater devaluation of the US dollar or Canadian dollar, another banking crisis, potentially 10 times bigger than what we saw, a cash crisis, a debt crisis. My fear is that most people's portfolios are just not prepared to deal with it, that there's so much trust or feeling that the S&P will just keep going higher. And most folks don't even know about the option of owning precious metals, especially physical gold, and what that could do to really safeguard or bulk up your portfolio for what we're up against.
How do you believe people could become more financially literate?
So unfortunately, our school systems do a really poor job, even if you're studying finance, because people traditionally are just taught to do whatever Wall Street's doing and not necessarily what central banks are doing. So usually the way education happens is someone starts thinking outside the box, starts questioning the status quo, and maybe stumbles upon shows like ours. And then maybe they start telling their family members, they start telling their friends. But it really has to come with the curiosity, or just thinking like, what if it's not what we're being told in the mass media? What if there's more? So unfortunately, the education doesn't happen in a traditional model. I feel like sometimes it just has to come to a point where people really start scratching their heads and finally realizing like something's not right. And that's when they kind of go down that rabbit hole and start really figuring things out. Because when I speak to my friends, a lot of my friends who've never even thought of, like I said, owning assets outside of the traditional model, they don't even know that their dollar, I'm speaking for my American friends, has been devaluated over 50% since 2020 alone. So this loss of purchasing power, people have no idea what they're up against. They're so focused on inflation, and rightfully so, but at the same time, your dollar just keeps losing more and more power. And that's a terrifying thing. People think we can never have a currency crisis. It won't happen in countries like Canada and the US until it does.
I've heard you interview before Robert Kiyosaki, and
Yeah.
you shared, Ashley, it was like, I think one of your most recent interviews when you went and you visited him.
Yes. Yeah.
And you were saying how, you heard a lot of these lessons from him, years ago when you were first starting in your career. And now, decade fast forward, you realize that, wow, they're actually playing out. So how has he taught you, outside of the educational system, to embrace like a rich mindset over a poor mindset?
So that was a pivotal, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a real pivotal moment for me. So early on in my career, I remember when I first interviewed Robert, and this is like, I'm going back, this is like 2010 at this point. And Ben, you have to understand, I was someone who loved school. Um, and I'm still saying school is good, but I was, on student council and very involved, and I had really good grades. Whatever, graduated cum laude. Like, I'm this rah-rah person for the school system. But I realized the school system had really boxed me in. I knew from an early age I wanted to be a journalist. But because I was really strong in the social sciences, like poli-sci, history, whatnot, the teachers were really trying to say, you should go into cover politics. Like, financial journalism wasn't even a thought because maybe math was not the subject I loved most. And that's such a wrong way of thinking, because I ended up falling in love with monetary policy and how money really works and finance. But I would have never known it from the school system because I think most of us are boxed in wrongly, actually. So when I first interviewed Robert, he was so pessimistic about the schooling system and thinking, you don't need to go to school. And I'm like thinking, like, what is he saying? Like, what do you mean you don't need a college degree? And he felt that most teachers should probably not be role models, and that they were teaching a certain way of thinking. And I could not see what he was saying at the time. And now it makes perfect sense to me. Now, ideally, I would still love my children to go to college. I mean, they're only 4 now, and I'm still a proponent of going to college, but for different reasons. Like, I think it's good from the standpoint of building a network, meeting people, but how much do we really retain or learn from our education? Things we really use. I mean, the greatest skills I learned were outside of school. And then I had to self-teach myself the gold world and what I'm covering now. None of what I cover now was ever taught to me in school. And it's so much more useful and has really helped me build my wealth and my family's wealth, and not what I was taught in school. So that's what I wanted to tell Robert, is that what he had told me once ago, it didn't make sense. And now I see everything so clearly now. And so many of the brightest minds, the giants of this industry, don't have a college degree. And again, I'm not saying don't like going to college is a bad thing. I still see the benefits. But you don't necessarily need to be successful. And most of what you will really use in life is absolutely taught and learned outside of the school system, or you're going to teach yourself. Because most of the educators, a few like I've interviewed, actually know the role of gold and what monetary policy should really be. But I think most of what's being taught in the schools is pointless.
Right. So let's kind of stay with the topic of gold. Why
Yeah.
do you own gold?
I always say gold has become an extension of me. And I always tell folks, like, I was just at Rick Rule's conference and people want to know how much gold do I own and whatnot. And I don't necessarily want people to do what I'm doing because I'm so comfortable with gold, but it's also an asset that I have, or whatever you want to, however you want to define it, money, asset, whatever you want to call it. I have studied it and lived with it day in, day out for close to 20 years. So I don't track the price every day. I mean, I used to when I worked at Kitco because that was part of a function of my job. I don't lose sleep over gold, and I really believe I'm building generational wealth. I don't believe you buy gold to sell it. And that's what upsets me when I see bullion dealers pushing that message, like buy your dream home with gold, sell it today. No, because I understand why they're pushing that message. It's only to benefit themselves and not the person owning the gold. I think it's an awful message. You really only want to sell your gold if you have no other choice. So yeah, if you, God forbid, you lose your job or you can't put food on the table anymore, if you have to pay for your kid's college or whatever house, then yeah, you know, you might need to be put in, you might be in a situation where you're going to have to sell your gold. But if not, I would say in any situation, there should be no situation where you have to sell your gold. And it's there to protect your wealth and to grow your wealth, and it be passed down. And like I said, create generational wealth. So I have very little confidence in paper money. And therefore I try and allocate as much as I can to gold. But gold has also been great to me. I kind of, Kiyosaki probably would say the same thing. There's like an energy that surrounds it that you just can't explain. I mean, I met my husband in the gold industry, and now we have, 2 beautiful children. So I have a lot to thank this industry for, and it's just I really just believe in gold. And like I said, I lose no sleep in it. It's not a speculative bet for me. It's a wealth builder and keeper, wealth shield, if you may.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
like a golden armor. I appreciate that answer. And a lot of people could even, Google search, right? And think, okay, why do I invest gold, and get similar reasons that you just explained, which is great. But what about the misconceptions that maybe the average individual has? How would you like to debunk something? Is there something that you hear often about gold that you're like, man, I just want to educate more people about this properly?
I think there's a misconception about the people who own gold, that we're a bunch of, crazies. Like the term gold bug, I don't remember who said it, that they hate that term. And I have to agree, because I feel there's such a negative connotation attached to that. But again, it's because I don't feel that, and having worked on Wall Street, and I know some people will disagree with me, I don't think Wall Street likes covering gold. Because I get it. It's not exciting like Bitcoin or Nvidia. But guess what? It's going to be there at the end of the day, and it's going to be there for you. So I think people think, oh, people just own gold that think the world's going to end. And it's not true. Like I said, I think there's no other asset on the planet that can protect your wealth and build your wealth the way gold can. And we're not just a bunch of crazies. I think we're actually very educated people who are looking at the world through a different set of eyes. Because if you're tracking the gold market, I'm going to use precious metals and commodities. I'm going to include oil in there, silver, the PGMs, wheat, whatever. It forces you to have a global view of the world, because you have to know about what's going on in China. You have to go what's going on in India, what's going on in Russia, the relationships between these countries, what's happening in monetary policy. What's the ECB doing? What's the BOJ doing? What's the Bank of England doing? What's the Bank of Canada doing? What's the Fed doing? So you really have a global macro view of the world. We're not closed-minded people. We're actually very open-minded people, looking at what's happening in the world and saying, all right, what's the best way to build wealth and preserve my wealth here? So I think that's really the biggest misconception, is that people are like, oh, you like gold? That's weird. No, it's actually not.
For sure. And you always sit down with, some of the brightest minds right now in the investment space. And you've had some really interesting guests in the past of your whole career, people from like Mark Cuban, who has
Yes.
criticized gold, but then
Yep.
other individuals like Peter Schiff, who is a big lover of gold. So
Right.
how do you, when you're, navigating, let's say, contradicting views on gold, how do you, with time, after interviewing all these individuals, get a better understanding of why you make your own investment decisions and not depend on views of others?
I kind of separate myself, like Daniela the investor and Daniela the interviewer. So when I'm interviewing someone, and I interview people all the time that I disagree with, they think the BRICS is a joke, or if they don't think the US dollar is going to, die anytime soon, or whatever. I have my views and they have their views, but I always treat it like they're I see the interview as I'm welcoming someone into my house. They're my guest for that session. And I want to openly hear what they want to say, what they have to say. And I want to be open-minded. I don't want to bring my beliefs into that interview. I'm going to challenge them on both sides. Like I'll challenge a Schiff who thinks gold's going to whatever, 25,000, right? So I really take, like I said, Daniela as the investor out from the equation. It's really just, okay, like take Mark Cuban as an example. He thinks gold's a pet rock. He's very bearish gold. He thinks it's stupid to own gold. Okay, well, I want to know why. I want to educate myself and hear from him, who's obviously, he's a billionaire and very successful. It's not to say you have to own gold to be successful. He's proof of it. But I want to know what he's doing. And I'll always learn something and take away. It doesn't mean I'm going to change my strategy when it comes to gold or whatever else I'm holding. But I'm going to respect what they're saying. And I always want to be able to offer my audience, not just one view, one-dimensional view. I want to bring on the contrarians. I want to bring on people that I don't agree with, whether the audience may hate it or not.
Someone who I know you interview a lot, but you also really value the way he looks at the world is Frank Giustra. And what is it that he has taught you when you think about like investing principles? What are some of the principles he's taught you? And on top of that, before you share those, how did you guys first meet?
We met many years ago at a conference, face to face. I mean, obviously, I knew who he was. And it was just a friendship that developed over time. I mean, outside, obviously, of our mutual love for gold, we have a lot of other things in common, passions in common, like, good food and good conversation and love of values, love of family. So very similar families. I mean, our backgrounds are both Italian, Canadian. So I really see him as an extension of my family. And the thing that strikes me most about Frank is, here he is, the pinnacle of success. He's, one of the giants that walks this world. And yet is so humble and kind and generous. But the humility, I mean, when you're with him, he just makes you feel that there's no difference. We're like on the equal playing field. So it's just like being with a friend. And, he's just such an incredible mentor that to the point where I feel outside of my immediate family, like if I would have a question about my career or even my personal life, I feel I could go to him and he would give me the best advice, really. And whether I'd want to hear it or not, because he's the first I'm going to hear from. If he thinks I could have done better on an interview or could have pushed a question more, you better believe he's going to let me know. But I know it's coming from a place that he just wants to push me to reach my greatest level. And I just have the greatest admiration for him. Like I said, he's really become an extension of my family. So he's an incredible person, and I feel very fortunate and lucky that I've met him and I know him, and he's guided me so much.
I've heard you speak before, even, something that Frank taught you was arc of history will always continue without our output. And how do you apply that to think, okay, you don't always have control over history, but how do you protect yourself?
Well, that's a really good point because many people don't know this, but yeah, well, I'm sure many people do know this, but Frank's a historian, and that's the other thing he's taught me, is that you need to be reading history and reading great books of great men and women. Because it's crazy how everything just repeats, and all great empires have come and gone. And that's why when we think, well, the American empire can never fail, well, just look at history, and it's not going to escape falling at one point. So I think you have to respect and study history. And what Frank has taught me, because I always ask him, like, how did you know that was gonna happen? Because I'll play back interviews with him that I've done in 2008, 2010, and he always, whatever came, he saw coming. And I'll ask him, like, Frank, how did you know? And he'll say, look at the patterns, look at history. He's like, it's obvious. Look at how things are aligning. And he pieces the puzzle together. And if you start looking at those constellations in the sky and piecing it together, it will make sense to you as well. So we have to study history. We have to look to history. And what's the test of time is, it's sounding like an infomercial for gold, but gold has stood the test of time. It's always been here throughout history. But then, to your point, regardless of what happens, I mean, I don't have control over what the Fed's going to do, and no one has control over what they're going to do and what's going to happen. Like, look at the pandemic, right? No one had control. And things will come and go. And we just have to, apart from money, I think, just really truly value what's important in life, which is health, family, friendships. And that's all that really matters. Like, yeah, is it great to have money? For sure. But if you don't have your health or family, and I know it sounds cliche, but you truly have nothing.
Danielle, I'm curious now to just ask, like, you've also spoken a lot about Bitcoin as well, and it is referred to as like the digital gold. So how do you compare the roles of Bitcoin and gold in today's financial world?
So full disclosure, and I've said this, I own Bitcoin. I mean, it's a very not compared to my gold holdings. I mean, it's not comparable, but we do own Bitcoin. But I see Bitcoin as a speculative play. And that's how I view it. And Max Kaiser and I can argue about this till the end of time. I'm not saying not to own Bitcoin. I wouldn't put your life savings into Bitcoin, but if Bitcoin goes over 100,000, fantastic. If it goes over 200,000, fantastic. If it goes to 1 million, phenomenal. But, and I've said this in the past, I do not put money that I can't afford to lose into Bitcoin. And again, I get it. So, like Michael Saylor, I get it. And I'm open. You know what? After you speak with Michael Saylor, you're going to want to put all your money in Bitcoin. So that's where you just have to really figure out the path you want to be on. So like I said, for me, gold is that comfortable path. And yes, I have some money in Bitcoin. And if it takes off more than it has, then awesome. But I can't compare Bitcoin to gold, because I see them as completely having two different functions. So I don't not like Bitcoin. And I respect, like I said, Michael Saylor, Max Kaiser's views on it. What El Salvador is doing with it, fantastic. At the end of the day, if it could give financial freedom to someone or to a family, then I'm on board. Because there's nothing like having freedom, financial freedom.
We usually hear a lot about the differences of gold and Bitcoin, but what about the big picture similarities of?
Well, yeah, that's what I told. So I had Jack Mahler's on, just incredible guy, fascinating. I don't even know how old he is, but he's just like wise beyond his years and obviously has done phenomenally well when you're talking financial freedom, right? And that's exactly what I was telling him. Like we there's so much like hate or this gold versus Bitcoin. And by the way, I just spoke at the Bitcoin conference in Montreal. So because I believe that at the end of the day, whether you own gold or whether you own Bitcoin, there's definitely a distrust in government, distrust in the central banks, and a need to own something outside of the traditional system. So whether you choose Bitcoin, whether you choose gold, whether you choose Ethereum, whatever it is, just educate yourself, know why, like just don't jump on the bandwagon. Don't buy gold because Daniela said, don't buy Bitcoin because Max Kaiser told you to. Like research it, educate yourself, and then make the decision. I think anything outside of cash is good. So yeah, that's why I don't think it's a versus discussion, more of understanding why you're choosing one over another, or do both, own both, you know.
And Daniela, I want to shift towards something that I'm always very impressed about with you is I can feel this like passion to actually helping people and, thinking, okay, how can I educate? How can I educate? And, I get that in a lot of your interviews because you don't just get the perspectives of these brilliant individuals, but you also get who they are and how they think and how they see the world and stories. And you even go to their homes and it really has a real experience, I think, on viewers like myself. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you navigate through all the news out there and come up with the best quality content of the best of your abilities for your audience?
Wow. A lot of it, yeah, and I guess the sense of like, if I could just add, the sense of helping, I think really was instilled from my parents. Like my father had a small, medium-sized business. So I think from a young age, I always saw like you want to be able to give back. So if I can help a small business or medium-sized business or help educate people, like I have it just instilled in me that my mission is to help people. I generally, if I can help you without getting anything in return, I'm so happy to do that, right? But to answer your question, I'm a news junkie. So I don't watch TV shows actually. Like my husband's still like, how you're the only person in the world who's never seen The Sopranos. I can't get into series, but I love news. And I feel that's part of my research. So I'm either reading all the time, sharing news clippings and getting news clippings from, a group of friends on text that are also news junkies, digesting news from all over the world. Because you're only going to get a one-sided view if you just read stuff from North America. So, and that helps me in my research. And then I kind of try and tailor it to the guest. And I really want to get to know the passions of my guests, what drives them. And it's just from my general nature, like I'm just curious by nature, and I'll try and ask questions that I think the audience would want to know. But again, the research just comes to me just taking in news from all over. And if I see a cool headline, then maybe I'll ask Gerald Celente what he thinks, or Frank Giustra what he thinks, or Kiyosaki what he thinks. And that's it, really. And obviously, I'll also watch, other interviews they did, because I hate being redundant or repetitive or doing what someone else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to always try and push the bar, because Ben, since I started, and even since when you started, look how many other podcasters there are. Like everyone has a podcast now. Well, how can we set ourselves apart? You got to find an angle or a hook that's going to make you different. And that's what I try and do, is ask questions that someone else wouldn't ask. take it from a different angle. Because it's also more interesting for the person you're interviewing as well, right?
I love that about you because there's most of the time I find there's questions that they're known for, but then there's questions that you'll ask that they've never been asked. Right.
Like
So
sometimes I'll be like, what movie did you like? And sometimes the answers will just really surprise you. And sometimes that's where the greatest moment of the interview lies, is when I'll never forget once I interviewed E.B. Tucker, and that video did really well. And people, what they loved most from that interview, like we spoke financial stuff, but at the end he was telling us about how his diet and what he does and how he drinks raw milk or, organic freeze-dried blueberries, whatever it was. And it resonated with so many people that I was like, wow, that was the biggest takeaway from that interview. So I think there's people want to know what a lot of these greats like a Frank Juster, like what do they do in their daily life? Because we just see them as brilliant financial minds, but what do they do on a Sunday morning?
I love that. And so how do people like yourself, myself, how do we continue to create better content that's more with a storytelling lens?
It's a hard question because I think you have to, what I try and do is for myself, I don't want to be like any other podcast, and I want to keep pushing the bar. I was probably on video confidently say the first to cover the precious metals space. And like I said, there's just been so many add-ons now, but it has to be a personal goal of you want to just better yourself, but still remaining authentic to yourself. So when I went to Gerald Chalente's home to cook, it's because I was generally, just interested to get to this house that's so unique in itself. And I love cooking, and it's just an extent, it wasn't I wasn't like a fish out of water. It's because I love doing all that. I wanted to learn more about him, and it just became, a hit. So I think you have to try and grow your show in a way that still is Ben and true to you. And just try and always find a dimension of the person you're interviewing that hasn't been uncovered before. It's not an easy task because a lot of these guys and women have been interviewed thousands of times, but just take it from a different perspective, what haven't they been asked, or what do they think of this? Just try and look at it come at it from a different angle.
Right. So let's try that with you then in terms of
no.
what is,
Try it.
in the hotspot, what is the most influential book that you believe holds great value for investors? Because I know you read a lot.
It's like picking favorite children. I don't think there's one, and I don't think there's one Bible or one influential book, or one that I would say you have to read because it's going to change your life. And it doesn't have to be a financial book. Like my favorite book of all time is The Great Gatsby. Because the way it sums up human behavior, I think, is probably one of the greatest stories ever told. And I think about that book a lot. And I think about that book a lot when I interview. So I can't say there's I could tell you Principles by Ray Dalio, like all these, traditional books. There's not one, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad or whatnot, but you just keep reading. And I think the greater thing is read from different sources. Like if you're only getting your news from Fox, there's an issue, or from CNN. So I read a lot of stuff coming out of Europe. Or what I'll also do is I have friends who are native Chinese. Actually, my producer is from China. And I'll ask her to tell me what she's really hearing when she goes to China, or what's really being said in the state media. And sometimes it will blow your mind. You're like, wait, we're being told this, but that's really the situation. So I think whenever you can, try and get closest to the source that you can. Caught up in headlines, like when everyone ran with that, petrodollar story, like, oh, Saudi's dumping the dollar. Well, no, if you start digging in and interviewing people and checking sources, because what happens in this day and age, the danger of social media is people just run with headlines. They don't fact check. They don't do there's so many makeshift reporters. So you really got to be careful.
I appreciate that answer. And my next question that I want to ask is, you've interviewed, again, so many brilliant minds in the investing space, but you probably start to pick up on common themes of what makes a great investor. And a lot of my audience that choose to tune into the financial interviews on my show, they're trying to become a better investor with each episode. So in your view, what makes a great investor?
I think a great investor is someone who knows when to cut their losses early. So if you think that, and I think the greatest investors, ones who have made the most money that I've met, have been able to pivot fast and quickly. And not, even if it means they've lost money, even if it's only 3 months in, but if they have a feeling or don't see it headed, they don't linger. They're able to, and that's not, there are exceptions where you kind of want to wait, but they're able to pivot or cut their losses early. And a great investor knows, so if you're talking mining stocks, they know the project, they know the management team. They're not just investing because someone told them a stock tip at a conference. So at Rick Rule's conference, I just met, so many high net worth investors, and I was actually trying to find the common denominator of these people. And first of all, they're showing up at a conference. That in itself is like, wow, you're educated. You're going to the heart of the matter. They're going to go talk to the companies themselves. They're going to go, Jim Rickards was there. They're going to go learn from greats like Jim and hear them speak and ask questions after. So again, it comes down to education, knowing what you're investing in, and being able to say, you know what, this one's a loser. I got to get out.
Last time you came on my show, I asked you, I said, hey, who's someone you would love to see on the show? And you told me at the time, you were like, Ben, I would love to see Ray Dalio. So a question that I want to ask you now, fast forward 2 years, who is someone that personally that you would love to see on the show?
You know what? It's so funny. I guess I'd still want to see Ray Dalio, but I think I've changed my mindset a little bit. It's kind of like, if I get him, great. But if I don't, my show can still be amazing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I'd love to speak with Goonlock. I have in the past. Like, would I love to have him back on? Sure. I mean, would I love to have a conversation with Fed Powell? Yeah, of course. So I think it's still important to have a bucket list of people you want to interview, but not to get so caught up that if I don't have Ray Dalio on, then I haven't made it. It's like, no, there's, what I found, Ben? We get so caught up in names, like, oh, they work at Goldman Sachs or they work at this. And really, the most fascinating people I've met have no labels attached to them. So I think we get so caught up, like, oh, it's Ray Dalio. You know what? He's a person like you, like me, like you, like, yeah, he has a lot more zeros after his net worth than we do. But he's still just a guy. And so I just, I don't want to just have to interview someone or put someone on a pedestal because they're Ray Dalio. Because I might have an incredible conversation, like, again, not to bring up a cruise conference again, but there was one investor I was speaking to on the boat cruise. total, again, like just wearing shorts, baseball cap, older gentleman, a wealth of knowledge. I learned so much. Like I took maybe 30, 40 minutes speaking with him. He came up, he's a huge fan of the show. And I was like, wow, here's someone who would be a great interview. He's not famous. No one knows who he is. Didn't write a book. He should. He's a grandpa and an incredible, fascinating person. Doesn't have Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, or any of that. Self-taught and a wealth of knowledge. And that to me is a greater relationship than meeting Ray Dalio.
I would say I'm totally aligned with you too. It's crazy some of the interviews that you end up having with some of your guests, and you haven't met them. It's the first one. You're kind of excited, but you always see like how someone shows up, to the interview, and it's game day. And you always see, how they truly are, right? And those are the things that beyond the title, like you were saying, at the end of the day, it's who they truly are, right? So putting the title aside and bringing on people that are truly amazing.
Yeah, and everyone has to get their start. Like, I'm not going to give myself kudos, but there's some people that were never interviewed before, and I had started interviewing at Kitco. No one had ever heard of them before, and they became household names, or they went on to build newsletter businesses, and I'm happy I was able to help with that and give them a stage. All I do is give people a stage. Then it's up to them to do what they want with it. And some people's businesses really took off. And again, I'm happy to do that. And then they become a household name, but not, so everyone has to start somewhere. Again, going back to this, we get caught up in, he knows Ray Dalio or, Bill Ackman, or it's like, we can't get caught up in this game. They're just people.
And also,
yes, they've done great things in their life. They've built tremendous wealth, but there's other people on the earth that maybe we've never heard of that are 10,000 times more fascinating. So if I could bring those people on the show and introduce them to people watching, then that's great.
For sure. And also, not many people will become a Ray Dalio as well. So even though audience is obviously trying to be 1% better with every interview and guest, you also want to have guests that are more relatable to the average person in the audience, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, look, yeah, sure. If either of us got Ray Dalio on, I'm sure it would be viral hit, right? Like you'd get a lot. Well, actually not necessarily, but yeah, technically you should get a lot of like views. But that's the other thing I think in this YouTube world we all live in, there's such a focus that we get caught up in the algorithm and how many views and this. And if you focus on that, you will lose sight of everything. And I see so many podcast people doing that, and you just lose sight of the bigger picture. I think that's, if anyone watching this is in content creation, that's probably the best advice I could give you, is don't get caught up in the number game, because you'll go mad and nuts.
No, I appreciate that. And it makes me think too, I think from the gold space, I would love to interview more individuals that maybe aren't specifically from the investment world. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say NHL players that own gold. And I know there's someone that and I don't know if you've interviewed him, but Phil Esposito.
Yes, I have.
Is the name. Have you?
Yes. So it's so funny because I text Phil, like he texts me, and it's like, my family is a diehard hockey family, and they're like, wait, Phil Esposito, like hockey legend, like we're just chatting, but yeah, he loves gold. And he has like a solid gold puck from his Bruins days that I know that he's also looking to sell, and I'm sure he'd be happy if I said that. But yeah, like that was a great interview, and maybe it didn't get, whatever huge views, but it was still awesome. And so many people came up to me remembering that interview that I had done with him, So yeah, if I could find folks that you would never think, like gold or precious metals or alternative investments, bring them on, then that's a win-win for sure.
I also want to do the same because, yeah, again, like there's a lot more people than we think from the audience that aren't that 1%, like a Ray Dalio.
Right.
People would love to hear that, oh, they're investing and why they're investing and why they're putting
Yeah.
that smart money.
I mean, because the thing is, like, I remember when my Kitco days, it took me a long time to build that Rolodex of sources. And then I kind of built that Rolodex, left it at Kitco when I left Kitco. But then what happens is that then they continue interviewing the same people. We all are interviewing the same people. So I think it's important to keep finding new people. There are new people to interview and new sources of information.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Danielle, I want to kind of take this last little bit of time, to thank you for being here, but also to give you one last opportunity here. Are there any other final words that you want to leave with the audience?
Well, I want to thank you again, Ben. I think, like I said, you're really growing in popularity, and so many people know you now. So I want to congratulate you on the success of your show. I want to thank you for having me on. And if I can help you build your podcast in any way, I'm happy to do that. I want to also give people a message of hope, because I know a lot of my content and a lot of my guests are very bearish of what's ahead. But if you educate yourself, and I always say this, especially for people who are not new to gold investing. And I gave this advice to one of my girlfriends who kind of saw the writing on the wall, started calling me saying, how do I start? And I said, you know what? Buy what you can. So whether it's an ounce of silver or a fractional piece of gold, whatever, start with what you can. But what you'll notice, and whatever you're deciding, and even if it's Bitcoin, whatever, just buy a little. And then you'll start to notice, you'll start educating yourself. Like, you'll start maybe tracking the price or reading the headlines. And then you'll just fall down that kind of rabbit hole where you start educating yourself, and then you can build and build and build. So I always say, step one, educate yourself on whatever you're investing in. I know that a lot of the headlines are terrifying, especially when we're talking like risk of nuclear war and this presidential election and what's going to happen. We have no control over it. We can control what we do for ourselves. So try and always enjoy your day-to-day, value what matters. Like I said, take care of yourself, take care of your health, love your family, love your friends, help someone if you can, educate yourself, and take care of your body, exercise, because if you're walking and you can move your arms, you can, and that's a blessing because so many people can't. So take care of your body, take care of your mind, watch the food you eat, eat organic, grow it if you can. Be open to learning, be open to growing. And that's what you can do. And you'll find the more you educate yourself and start putting money aside, and don't get caught up in, oh, I want this luxury bag or whatever, but realize like, oh, I could put it and save it and build wealth. You'll start feeling more in control of what you can be in control of, and just feel better prepared for whatever we may be up against. And try not to be on social media, I would say, as much as my show's on YouTube, but don't get sucked into Instagram or Facebook, because it's just such a distraction. And go outside, smell the roses, look at the sky, breathe. And you're so right, that's truly where beauty lies. And yeah, at the end of the day, my babies, it was great to be at Rick's conference, but I took an 8 p.m. flight, landed at 1 a.m. just to get home to them. And all I want to do is just snuggle them and be with them, because I also realize they're not going to be kids forever. And when they're going to be like, see ya, mom. So I really try and value this time, which everyone tells me is fleeting. It's going to go by. So I really to any young parents watching could tell you, my kid's already 4 and I don't know where those 4 years went. So that's what I really focus on.
I love that, Danielle. Well, thanks again for being here.
No, it was my absolute pleasure. You do a great job, Ben. You are a very authentic person, and it comes through, and that ultimately will be your greatest, I don't want to say weapon, but what really will set you apart from everyone else having a podcast is that you are unique and different. And I just want to say, just stay true to who you are, and success will find you 100,000%.
I appreciate those kind words. Thanks again.
Thank you.